Good evening and welcome back to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining us now for the third part in our draft follow-up series on the Buffalo Bills 2020 NFL Draft. And tonight we are going to be diving into Gabriel Davis, University of Central Florida wide receiver. And again, we are joined by our friend Christian Page, going to be diving through. Christian, how are we doing?
Always good to be talking the NFL draft.
Love it, love it, and it's fun. We're getting now into the real meat and potatoes, as Russell said on your guys' Cover One Draft podcast of the draft, and a guy that the Bills pick that maybe wasn't on as many Bills fans' radar. I think that wide receiver was obviously a huge need going into the offseason, and then when you go and trade your number one pick and then three more day three picks for a guy like Stephon Diggs, it certainly can be that kind of flashy distraction that can take your attention off of who else you're going to be looking at. And then, there's a lot of players that got people's attention at the Senior Bowl, got people's attention with crazy performances at the Combine, and were maybe at a major program in, the college football playoff and things like that. And all those things I rattled off, it just wasn't really where Gabriel Davis flashed. So we're going to dive in a little bit here to be able to learn a little bit more about who the Bills added in their new receiving talent. But before we do that, make sure you're checking out what we have going on at cover1.net. Dive in, join the premium membership, the premium Slack channel, having a great time. We're now chasing down all these UDFAs and all the other pieces, figuring out what's next for the Bills and what's going on here. But with Gabe Davis, give us a little high-level overview of what you know of him and what we can expect to be added to the receiver room.
He loves to win down the field. I mean, I think that's kind of his bread and butter. He's played on the outside pretty much his whole career at UCF. And we'll get into maybe that's his limited role in Buffalo's system, but I think, given who they already have on the roster, that's probably perfect to pigeonhole him in that situation. But he likes to play on the outside. I think he had around 17 yard per catch average in his career, but constantly wins on the perimeter. Does a pretty good job in contested situations. I know he dealt with some drops this past year. I believe he was around 9 or 10 in 2019 as far as drops go. But overall, he wins in contested situations. You saw the quarterback play kind of fall down a little bit this year for UCF. So you saw a lot of times where he's a really good ball tracker, but you saw him have to kind of redirect and come back to the ball on those vertical passes. So you see kind of some of those instincts, some of that ball awareness to go grab it. But I know it's odd to say that he consistently wins downfield, and I think he ran just around a 4.5, 4.40. So he's not this blazer, but still, I mean, 4.54, that's not slow whatsoever. But yeah, again, he just likes to win on that perimeter, likes to play the vertical passing game, not going to be too much of a threat underneath. He does have some subtle foot quickness, but he doesn't really use it to his advantage. And now, is that a victim of being part of that offense, being pigeonholed on the outside? Maybe so, because he shows a little glimpses of that. But sometimes he'll use his foot quickness a little overbearing into the sense where it almost hurts him instead. So if he doesn't win off the line of scrimmage, you won't necessarily see him win all across all parts of the field. But if you get him in that vertical passing system, put him on the outside, he's definitely going to find success there.
No, and I think that makes sense. It's a player that, we were talking pre-show about the different tiers of receivers, and I think obviously everybody knew of, your Jerry Jeudy, your, CD Lamb, your Henry Ruggs, and then there was a pretty wide swath of that second tier receiver that I think was really where the depth of this class came in, and then an enormous tier in that third group that comes in that just in many years, maybe Gabe Davis is a guy who is in there as a second or third round pick and the sixth or seventh receiver. And here, he might be anywhere from wide receiver 15 to 20 that there's so many talented guys. It's hard to figure out, who might be in the right spot. Where did you have Gabe in this class?
He was at wide receiver 17 for me. So just kind of in that tier 3 that we are kind of talking about. He doesn't necessarily have that wide receiver 1 capability. And I think that was kind of the misperception, I guess, of this wide receiver class, because it was known as such a deep and really, high contributors everywhere across the board. But I think there was only just a handful of those wide receiver ones, and then just a lot of role players, maybe in that tier 2, that could work themselves into a wide receiver 1 given the situation. But then that tier three is a bunch of guys like a Gabe Davis, like a James Prochet, who's now with the Baltimore Ravens, or KJ Hill that's now with the Chargers. Some of those back end guys that you see could be, function as a consistent role player, could have a long career at that. I think Gabe Davis kind of falls in that same mix, can be a complementary piece and give something Buffalo that they may not have at this point.
No, and I think that makes a lot of sense. We'll dive in a little bit here, taking a look at what we added. First on the measurables, it's a guy that, 6'2", 216, so has some strength. And I think even, plays as big or bigger than that on the field. So I think that's certainly something that comes through pretty standard from an arm length and hand size standpoint. And the vertical, and pretty explosive from a broad jump standpoint. Some of the quickness you see, like, how you talked about, maybe this translates in some of that struggle from a route running standpoint, and maybe a little bit of quickness, but not translating there. I think that comes through when you have, poor 3-cone and 20-yard shuttle from that standpoint. But I think that what you did see is, at least when he had a chance here, as you talked about, 17 yards a catch, definitely performed and came out, was on the field all the time. That's been a consistent thread through the majority of the picks the Bills made here, was not a lot of injury risk that was tolerated. So Gabe Davis was on the field consistently, was making big plays further down the field, 23 touchdowns while he was at UCF for his final season, 72 catches for 1,241 yards. Taking a look at our friend Russell, had him very similar. You had him 17th. He had him as 21st. I think that sounds about right with where that overall range was. And again, talked about the tracking, talked about, working his hands consistently, to be able to get some separation. And I think that when you have a guy being brought in that maybe has some of that skill set, some of that ability to be able to develop down the line, but you're coming in where you already have Stephon Diggs, John Brown, Cole Beasley, that really helps alleviate some of the pressure that he may have going into a different situation, where now you can isolate what he's good at. Let him go for some of those 50-50 balls, let him go for some of those things, being a red zone threat, being able to take advantage of that skill set. And then, if he develops beyond there, now you're talking about, a guy like Diggs, has world-renowned work ethic and fantastic footwork, and has turned himself into the best route runner in the NFL, that he didn't show up like that day one, into the NFL. So if you're going to give someone like Gabriel Davis, a chance to be able to do that, I like the idea of putting him in a room with consummate professionals like John Brown, like Cole Beasley, and then let's see what develops as we go through there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Russ and I talked about it maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we talked about Gabe Davis. And my reservations were with him were, can he get into a system where he is maybe that second guy on the roster? I didn't think he could, because he didn't have that intermediate work that you saw. He didn't have those route running abilities like you saw. But going to Buffalo is a perfect situation just from a personal development expectation for Gabe Davis here, because like you said, you have your premier route runner, Stephon Diggs, that can win at any level of the field. Cole Beasley, you're going to see him run, a lot of more intermediate routes, but still has that fine-tuned footwork to win at those small parts of the field. John Brown, he can win vertically. He can play in the slot, win that, has some underrated physicality as well. I think Davis, learning from just a multitude of different roles and position players like those three that we just talked about, among some others, it's a perfect situation from a personal perspective for Davis. And I think it gives a lot of relief maybe to some of those other guys, that they can focus and hone in on some other things than maybe they don't feel comfortable, maybe in what Davis's role is going to be. So I definitely think from a personal perspective and just an organization perspective, makes a lot of sense for Davis to be in Buffalo.
Well, and you take a look at the other end of the spectrum, obviously guys like Cole Beasley, John Brown, Stephon Diggs feel very confident in their, roster spot. And as we get further on this week, we'll be diving in with Russell on Isaiah Hodgins. Obviously adding 2 receivers from the draft and trading for Stephon Diggs, that's creating an incredible amount of competitive tension on this roster. And I think the being pushed from the other end, Brandon Beane in his post-draft presser talking about how much he and Sean McDermott believe in that iron sharpens iron mentality and that competitive tension that you want everyone to have. Gabriel Davis isn't going to have any walk in the park because he's coming in and he was drafted to take the role of Duke Williams, who's grasping at his last straw to remain in the NFL. He's coming in to take the spot of Robert Foster, who had that initial breakout moment in his rookie season as a UDFA, and then last year was basically relegated to just a special teams gunner. And that those are guys that now they watch this draft, with the same bated breath as every fringe NFL roster player saying, man, don't pick anybody at my spot. I hope they don't pick anybody for my role. When Robert Foster and Duke Williams saw Gabriel Davis and Isaiah Hodgins drafted, that was a huge splash of cold water on their, mentality. But I can also promise from everything that I saw in the training camps, practices, and access that we're able to have watching the team, those aren't guys who are going to throw in the towel. Those are guys who are going to show up ready to fight, especially Duke Williams, that he's not handing over his spot to anybody. He's going to be pushing there. So I kind of like the idea that obviously I think Gabriel Davis is in a slightly different position than Isaiah Hodgins. Being a fourth round pick, you very rarely see a fourth round pick not make a roster. So I think he's a virtual lock for the roster overall. But from a role standpoint, from a snap count standpoint, from an opportunity standpoint, I think that he is going to have to show up and really play at a very high level from day one to be able to earn those reps.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And is Davis or even Hodgins for that matter, they going to get plus 40% of the snaps? Probably not, but you still want to see them fall into a role where they can, find maybe a niche in that situation. And I think with both, just from an overarching standpoint of just the receivers that Buffalo did draft, and even though their roles may be a little different, but Davis and Hodgins are two very physical type receivers. They like to win at the contested areas of the field. Both of them had success in the red zone. I know that's Hodgins' bread and butter, but 50% of Davis's touchdowns, 12 of his 23, came in the red zone. So he can win those short area battles. He can win in the end zone and jump ball situations, coming off press. And Russ touched on, he has that intricate handwork to get off that press coverage, to win off the line of scrimmage. So they kind of have a role and maybe that's something that Buffalo lacked, and that's what McDermott and Bean saw. They said, hey, we need to address this part of the wide receiver position because some of the guys on our roster, maybe it is Williams, maybe it is Foster, that they wanted to be put in that position, and they haven't necessarily met the bill. So I definitely understand, the receivers that they selected in this class.
Well, and I think it's funny, you have guys where you understand why, from a fan base standpoint, you can latch onto the story of Duke Williams. You can latch onto the story of Robert Foster. But this is a perfect example of just the reality of the NFL, that it is a cutthroat business of, the highest, most elite athletes on the planet. And that guys like Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, as much as they talk about the family mentality, Brandon Beane talked about in his presser how hard that cut down day is. The Bills have now set themselves up with the deepest roster they've had in 25 years. There are going to be some incredibly hard battles to be fought here. As much as we saw last year with the trade of Wyatt Teller and Russell Bodine, and just guys that Brandon Beane has found a way to. He got compensation for Marshall Newhouse, for the Lord's sake. It's something that I think we're going to see plenty of that, and that they weren't in a position to do the comp pick bingo this year and to set themselves up. They are set up very well to do that next year and the year after. I think that's where he's going to recoup some of those picks, and the guys who don't win that competition in this wide receiver room, you're talking about the tail end of that group is probably one spot for Andre Roberts, Isaiah McKenzie, Duke Williams, and Robert Foster. That's going to be some guys who deserve to be on an NFL roster who it may not be in Buffalo come this fall. So from an overall standpoint, any other thoughts from Gabriel Davis? I know I'm looking forward to the physical mentality that it seems like he brings. Obviously, I like the deep ball. I like the fact that he can fight that hand usage, get up there, go for those contested balls. You always like the idea of making a 50-50 ball into a 90-10 ball, and it sounds like he's the kind of guy that plays as big or bigger than his, measurables, and is able to do that contested deep ball, fight to be able to come down for it. Anything that we should be looking out for, the Bills fans can look forward to with this new addition?
Yeah, I think with just his overall catch radius, and this is not me knocking Josh Allen, but we know some of his accuracy can be very sporadic at times. But I still think if Davis can follow the flow of the play, can kind of maybe be a security blanket. He can kind of catch some of those unorthodox throws, and so I think that's something like I talked about. The UCF quarterback play wasn't on par where it had been with McKenzie Milton in the Scott Frost days, so he had to adjust to some inaccurate passes. Like I said, he could win consistently downfield, but you had to kind of see him stop and plant his foot, go up and capture the football, which in a sense, if you're looking from a scouting report perspective, kind of helped him in that regard because he had that ability. But of course, football is not always perfect. You can have the perfect play, but it's not always executed to perfection. So Davis kind of gives some of those off balanced, unorthodox type catches and showcases some of that body control near the sideline. So that's probably something a little different that you may not see in the skinny of a scouting report. But when sometimes the play breaks down, he has that instinct to know what to do. Not necessarily always is going to come back to the football, but if you kind of throw it up there, he'll kind of have that backyard mentality. Hey, this is my ball, and I'm going to go grab it. And he can also has that body control to come down with the 2 feet in and then continue the rest of the play.
Well, and I think that's another interesting angle as far as just having guys like a Stephon Diggs to be able to mentor and to follow behind, that has incredible body control and has done that same idea. They having, some of that is just instinct. Some of that is stuff you're born with. And like you said, if you're seeing that on film with the challenges he had at quarterback at UCF, obviously all Bills fans are hoping that Josh Allen takes a step forward, but he's never going to all of a sudden transform into Drew Brees. It's just pinpoint accuracy all the time. We're obviously hoping he takes a step forward in that accuracy, but being able to make the best of some of those throws that do get away from him or aren't pinpoint, I think is a critical skill set. So adding someone with that catch radius that's there and that ability to make use of the ball when it's in the vicinity, even if it's not pinpoint accurate, I think is a very important skill set to add. So that's exciting to see. Let the people know where they can find you, what you guys have going on, or anything else that's coming up here in the future, or what you guys are doing. Maybe talk for a second on what the plan is to be able to fill some of this space coming up here, and what some of the things you may be diving into with Russell on Cover One Draft.
Yeah, I mean, we can I guess start to dive in some 2021 draft prospects. I mean, the film's there, so why not? We have no excuse to jump into it. But still wrapping up some of these, post draft thoughts. Scheme fits, whether it's for the Bills' perspective, just an overall NFL scheme fit. But at _Christian Page, you can find me on Twitter, and of course, cover1.net. Russ and I, Brad, Zach, Eric, all the whole crew, still dropping content to keep the appetite flowing, even though the draft is come and gone.
No, I appreciate it. And again, anyone who's not listening, Cover One Draft is an awesome show. I really loved each of the recaps here. Looking forward to being able to dive in next. And for someone like me, it's awesome to be able to partner with guys like Christian and Russell. That I'm purely Bills focused, and I dive in so much into every single intricacy of the contracts, the roster construction, the strategy, future assets, all the position battles, everything that's there. But that takes all my energy and time and attention, and that I'm not able to dive through all of the college games each fall, and that I watch the big ones. I'll have it on in the background. I watch the big bowl games and things like that. But the depth of knowledge and everything that Christian and Russell and Eric and Zach and Brad and everybody bring is just fantastic, and it really helps give me informed information to be able to know what we're walking into. So really appreciate everything you do on the show, Christian, and your Twitter follow is fantastic. So appreciate everything there. You guys have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.